Happy Monday morning. My name is Scott Stampillo, and my hair is a wreck. Look at that. Today's show is, well, first of all, I'm a modern longevitarian. Today's show, we're going to go over next level hacks or work-life balance with my friend, Damon Burton, the myth, the man, the legend, CEO of SEO National. That's a mouthful, right?
Yeah. Say
Welcome
that 5 times fast.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome, man. It's, I imagined like when we were planning out the show, you'd want to talk about, search engine optimization. I mean, I've got your book right here, right? You sent me, right? Outrank, right? That's your jam. But you said, hey, I want to talk about, work-life balance. And so how'd you get, well, first of all, let's just tell your story, how you got the business going. I mean, I know you did two things at one time. So let's give a little backstory about how you got to be this full-time entrepreneur.
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple little blips on the radar, but I think kind of the abbreviated sexy versions, I guess you'd say, are, I started the side hustle kind of thing. Well, actually, let's go back a little bit further than that. So I used to be, big into cars, as most guys are in their early 20s. And so I started a car enthusiast website. And then it started picking up traction, and that got me interested in better understanding web design. So that's how I started to improve my skill set more. And then as I grew the traffic, I said, well, how do I monetize this? So that's how I got into marketing. And then I did the side hustle thing for a while. And then at the point where I had enough income on the side where it was kind of like 80% of my time was spent at the day job, but it was only providing 50% of the income. And so I figured that by the time I could pay my bills with the side hustle, even though that sucked to lose half of the income, it was probably about as good as a calculated risk as I could take. And so at that point, I kind of jumped into the entrepreneurial world. And, I was able to, by freeing up that 80% of my time, I was able to make that income back. I want to say, this was 14 years ago. So I want to say it was 2 or 3 months. I can't remember all the details. I'm getting slightly older. But that's kind of the abbreviated version.
Yeah. Well, I don't, this about me. I'm into cars too, right? I used to race go-karts and all that stuff. I didn't know you were into cars. I mean, we should have probably got that. What kind of car did you have, or what was your favorite car you've had over the years?
So, well, I've kind of I wouldn't say I've fallen out of love with cars. I just am not up to par anymore. I have kids. And so I figure until I don't have to worry about Cheez-Its in between the car seats, that I've kind of fell out of the understanding of what my cool options are these days. Right. So I used to be the easiest way to kind of explain it is I used to be into kind of fast and furious cars. That's the website I started was about those kind of cars. And I started the website about 2 years before that movie came out. And so when the movie came out, it just further supported the growth of it. So I used to have like the Turbo Civic kind of thing. So.
Right. Got it. I was more into, my first car was a 69 Chevelle. Then I had a 67 Chevelle.
Yeah.
I had some Volkswagens. I had like 3 different Beetles. Like I had a 70, a 72, and a 73 Super Beetle, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And now I have a 1967 CJ5 Jeep that's painted to look like it's on MASH. It's got the star on the hood.
Yeah.
And the license tag's General. Right. So it's the General. Right. And we've rebuilt that thing a couple times to move the snow around here and up in
Park City. You're in the thick of it.
Yeah, for sure. So when it comes to processes for work-life balance, I know that's why people are watching, let's talk about your, where you set your boundaries, and then we'll get into like what kind of mechanisms and systems you use for that.
Yeah, so I kind of got into this. I have a very clear, I talked about a brief background. I can add to that that was a very definitive moment in me deciding to have kind of boundaries, as you said, with work-life balance. And that's really what you got to do, is you got to figure out where your hard lines are. So one of the last gentlemen that I worked for before I started my agency is, he was super successful, but he was really toxic to be around. And so this was, do you remember the T-Mobile Sidekick phones, like the little flip phones? So I had one of those Sidekick phones, and it was kind of when you could first start to put email on your phone. Right. And so I had email on my phone, and I was out at dinner with my wife, and it was on a Friday. It was after hours, and he was and this former employer was calling me, and so I didn't answer because I was at dinner. And then the phone calls moved to text and email, and so within a short period of time, it became so ridiculous that at that moment I deleted the email from my phone, and I've never had email on my phone since. So I haven't had email on my phone for 16 years.
Wow.
And so that's, especially running a marketing agency, which is, a lot of people associate that with technology. And so a lot of people get really surprised that I don't have email on my phone. I've pretty much never had it on my phone. I don't have Messenger on my phone. I never give my cell phone out to clients. As much as I love my clients, I have that boundary. And then I have our office phones shut off at 5. So, on weekends, I was joking with you before we jumped on. I said, I haven't checked my emails yet because it's like opening Pandora's box. But so I pick hard, I picked hard boundaries, and it's not that I don't, want to carry that. What a lot of people say, well, how do you manage these relationships? Because I think a lot of people nowadays are so, I don't know the proper word, but we've kind of become, we have a misunderstanding that we have to be available 24/7 nowadays, just because that's an option. And you can still grow and manage relationships and grow a business as long as you set expectations. That's as simple as it is. So anytime we have a new client, I explain to them in the negotiating process. It's even in the contract. I remind them afterwards. I say, hey, here's our availability. Here's the methods that you can contact us. And so as long as you set those expectations, then it's totally fine, and you don't run into any of those weird, awkward moments. But if you don't set them expectations in advance, then you can kind of run into those awkward moments later, though.
Right. Yeah. I've had that, as I'm transitioned over into being a modern longevitarian and being an entrepreneur versus the restaurant world. Right.
Mm-hmm.
When you're managing a restaurant that is open 7 days a week, or when I was a director of food and beverage of a hotel, that's 3 meal periods, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, you may be off and out of town and your phone's just blowing up.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, or you go for a hike in the desert, you get off the grid, you come back, and as soon as you hit cell coverage, it's just wham, and so I love the way you put that, is that it's an option, that 24/7 is an option. And most of us think that because we can, that we should, be available, with that. And so, I'm having to go back and reset boundaries, which is hard to do because I was programmed to be available for a
Mm-hmm.
restaurant or hotel food and beverage department, all the time, and so, so you've got to figure out what your hard lines are. And so, do you have like out of office reminders on your email, like when you're, set up automatically or anything like that?
No, because I'm pretty prompt. I'll always check them within a day, excluding weekends. So it's not like they go unattended. I've thought about it before, but then the problem you run into with that is then you get those annoying reminders every time they send an email, because on the other side, the clients may shoot you 2 or 3 emails, and then they're going to get 2 or 3 reminders. Or, you can set some rules that say don't send it more than every 24 hours. But as much as I email clients or they email me back, they're going to be getting those a couple times a week. So I kind of had to pick my battles on that one. So no, I don't have those on.
Got it. What other, I mean, cause you're spending time with your family, you're going out of town. I mean, I saw that, on Facebook that you were in Vegas driving like Lamborghinis or something a couple weekends ago, right? With your brother, right?
Yeah. And I just got home super late last night. I didn't go to bed till like 1 o'clock. I went down to southern Utah over the weekend. I took my wife and kids. We went down to Zion's National Park. So what I do is I try to stick to the Monday through Friday. You and I have chatted about me adjusting my schedule. So I'll kind of answer what my schedule is 2 different ways, what it's historically been, and then what I'm kind of transitioning to. So historically I'd wake up at 5 a.m. It's not that I was a morning person, but I like getting a head start on the world. And a lot of times you feel like you get more done in those 2 hours, 3 hours before everybody wakes up than you do the rest of the day. Mm-hmm. So historically I'd get up early and then I'd call it a day at 5. As I've been doing that for 15 years or so, my body's kind of telling me I need to switch it up a little bit. And I've always felt like I'm kind of more of a night person. So the problem that I would try to balance, though, by waking up early, in addition to getting a head start in the world, is I didn't want to do nights, even though I felt like I was a night person, because I felt like I would be taking away that time for the potential time for my family.
Mhm.
But at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm not taking away any time because they're still asleep. So now what I'm trying to balance, though, is my body said, hey, you need to kind of take a chill and adjust your schedule. Is now I'm trying to see if I can do those extra hour or two later in the evening. And it's starting to work out pretty good because, the kids will pass out at 10 o'clock. And then it seems like I get my second wind from, 10:30, and I get a 90-minute to 2-hour win towards the late night. So you kind of got to adjust, and you and I have talked A/B test what's best for you, but figure out what those boundaries are. So for me, usually what I'll do is, my kids will walk to school given the weather around 8:20, 8:30. And so I have that 30-minute window blocked off in the morning. And then I also have it blocked off around 3:30 in the afternoon as well. So I make those hard lines where you can't get on my calendar during those times because I want to spend that time wherever I want to spend it. But at the same time, though, that kind of gives you the option to reset a little bit and give you that little breather. So that the time away ends up making the time you're back more productive anyway, because you kind of get that little reset and that focus time.
Right. Well, I think this is a perfect segue for me to really talk about sleep, because even Kobe Bryant, and I wrote a book, Outstanding Landing, How to Get the Sleep of Your Dreams. And you can go to my website, strongforlonger.com, and you can download it for free. But my point is that even Kobe Bryant, in his quote was, he realized that his play was starting to suffer. And he's like, I'm just as good a shape as I was. I'm training in the gym. I'm doing all the shots. I got my moves. I got all these things. And he was only sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night. Not that you're sleeping 2 to 3 hours a night.
I wish I could.
Yeah. He said, Kobe, you're not a teenager anymore. You're not 21 years old anymore.
Yeah.
Right. And so he had to change his sleep. Right. And so I think that's something easy for people like you and me to do, and people that are listeners, entrepreneurs, CEOs, is that to say that, well, I'm going to cut my sleep short. I'm gonna get up earlier. Right. Then there's people like Jocko Willink, who's a Navy SEAL that, puts pictures on Instagram every day of his clock that says 4:32 in the morning. And, and he's working out. The next picture is an hour later of him, sweat dripping on a kettlebell or a squat rack or something, and then there's the book that, that you got to get up at 5 a.m. And I think people get trapped into thinking that that's what they have to do to be successful. But there's an old quote from Mary Kay. Remember Mary Kay Cosmetics, right? Remember that?
Yeah.
She said,
the pink Cadillacs.
Pink Cadillacs, right? Yeah. She said it was something along the lines is, no matter what you do, just work half the day, right? And that meant like work 12 hours, right? She was just saying, no matter. So someone like me, who's a dedicated, flag flying night owl, getting up at 5, I'd much rather go to bed at 5 a.m. I went to bed at 2:45 last night, and here I am.
But what's interesting is, so I've started to, when I was trying to start this transition that I've been working on the last month or two and figuring out what works for me and what doesn't, is I would go to bed. I would feel more tired going to bed at 9:30, 10 o'clock and waking up at 5 and getting, 8-ish hours of sleep than I would going to bed at like 2 o'clock in the morning and waking up at 8.
Yeah.
And so I'd get less sleep and I'd stay up way later, but I felt way better. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. I think that's what the listeners need to take away is there's no right answer as yes, 5 a.m. is sexy, but it's because you're getting an extra time. So you can still do that extra time at a different set of hours.
Right. And you also, like, people like you and me, you were giving our best time to our family. Right. Versus it, stealing away the sleep and being groggy all day and hungry and never satisfied and a little grouchy.
That's part of what made me start to switch it up is I started to be able to tell that I was just, at the end of the day, I was burned out. And so I couldn't give my best to my kids. And so that's when that's what, I had seen it coming that I was getting tired, but that's when I really started to feel it, when I was like, hey, I need to switch this up because I shouldn't just give them my fumes at the end of the day. And I should be able to do more things with them.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the chapters in the book is finding your sleep type, is really finding each individual one. And you took the test on Dr. Michael Bruce's website.
And it said I was a night person, which I figured, but I just wanted to fight it so bad.
It does. Right. But it's like when it tells you that, you're like, okay, this is the optimum time for me to get up and me to work out to lose weight and go to sleep and to have coffee and make love and you claim you have a hot wife. I haven't seen her yet, but it's
You
like
haven't
it's the
seen
best
my
time
hot
to do
wife?
that.
Well, I'm very private about, well, maybe we talk about that next, about privacy. Now when we get off, I'm going to have to call her down.
Okay. I may have seen a picture on Facebook, right? But it's funny. It's like this picture of your kitchen being clean, and you're like, oh, thanks to my hot wife, my kitchen's clean, right? Or something like that. But
it's all a lie.
There's a friend of mine. We've been friends for like 30 years, and he always referred to his wife as he was a computer guy, as the wife unit. When we had pagers back then, right? Like, the wife unit just sent me a message, and I was like, she's not even real, right? Are you throwing your voice when we're on the phone, right? It was like a really, it was a funny thing.
Yeah.
Tim Glowacki, and I'm going to have him on the show at some point too. Super cool guy, and knows a lot about health and actually is curing his type 2 diabetes with intermittent fasting and keto. So, I mean, and go ahead.
That's what I got to figure out next is, I've tried to figure out where I can balance. So I'm still the entrepreneur at heart where I want to maximize every second of the day. So I got to figure out how I'm going to balance, like, getting my sleep, but then I have an autoimmune condition, so I can only eat certain things. And so how do I balance my sleep, get certain hours of this, certain hours of work, but then squeeze in a meal as quickly as I can. But the meal also has to meet these conditions that support my autoimmune issues. And then prep time, do I pre-plan it? Do I make it right there? Like, it's a lot of things you got to figure out. But given my background in marketing and optimization, I'm very process driven. So I'm going to build out like an assembly line of the day. So this happens here and this happens here, and then I can do these two things at once. And so it's you don't feel rushed to figure out what's right for you. Like, this crap takes a long time, to do it right. And be okay with doing the A/B testing, doing the juggling, figuring it out, what's right, what's wrong. And because it sucks to go through this whole process and it takes a long time, but once you figure it out, it's awesome.
It is. You're more process driven than probably anybody I've ever spoke to in my entire life. I mean, is that something that is just come out of this desire to be super efficient during the day, or is it something that's always been in you? I mean, where did this come from?
A little bit of both. So looking back, I was, there's this one time that probably illustrates it well. When I was, I don't know, maybe 13, 14. So my parents were divorced when I was young. And so my dad came over to pick us up for the weekend or whatever. And I was doing, I got a CD holder, like a CD sleeve, like a 96 one, which was awesome because there were so many. And then, so while my dad gave it to me, or whoever gave it to me, and then the other person, I was putting in the CDs, and I remember my mom said, "Are you alphabetizing those?" So I was sitting there alphabetizing all my CDs. So I've always been very organized.
Right.
But then I would say it was about 4 years into my now 14-ish year entrepreneur journey where I realized how important processes were to scalability and efficiency. And there's like this whole other story about how I was reading E-Myth Revisited and 4 Hour Workweek kind of in the same time frame, and that set off a couple dominoes. And so when I went through that and really built out the processes, it really helped the company. And then not just from a growth standpoint from clients and finances, but I was also able to remove myself from some of the processes without that concern about quality control. And so then after I went through that and realized, like, personally saw the value, I think we all agree that we've heard the importance of processes, but until you personally see the potential of them, once I actually saw that, then now, ever since then, anytime I do anything that I think I'm going to have to do more than once, I try to document it right then or on round 2 and just get it over with, because I'm not saying documenting is fun, but seeing the results of it is fun. So once I kind of saw it, then I fully embraced it.
So do you have checklists or things like that, or how does your documenting the process work? How does that all fit?
I get very granular with how what comes to mind is on the business side, because that's what I'm doing most of the day is, so we get very granular with what my team does. So I have a team of 20. And so anytime I have a new set of tasks, we have a new process, I personally go in there and go through any possible variation of the process possible, because what happens is it's human nature to cut corners and not to do it intentionally or to, your team provides a lesser product. It's just, we look for the path of least resistance. And so I go through every process and try to figure out any tangent that's possible, because that way, as long as I have a team that can fully read the documentation and then follow the processes, then I know that the output is going to be perfect. So I just get very granular with it, which can be tedious, but then once it's done, and I never have to revisit it again.
Yeah, and that's one of the big things about the 4-hour work week, which put Tim Ferriss on the map, right? Is really, hiring virtual assistants, creating the process, giving them ability to make decisions up to a certain dollar amount, and then expanding that, and how people's mindset change when they're, tasked with making the decision versus when they're just waiting to be told what to do. And,
sense of responsibility, right?
Yeah, it does. It's really an interesting piece of the whole deal. So you mentioned privacy, right? So what are your guardrails or guidelines you have for people out there about setting up? Because we're on social media, we're building out Facebook pages, Instagram pages, we're doing stuff with our family, those type of things, right? So what do you have set up for your own personal privacy guidelines?
Yeah, before I jump into that, let me take one step back on the E-Myth and 4-hour work week. What I would say is, before you dive, any listeners that dive into 4-hour work week, before you do that, tackle E-Myth Revisited first, because 4-hour work week teaches you how to kind of hack your processes, but I wouldn't hack your processes until you know what your processes are. So go through E-Myth Revisited first, really figure out how to perfect whatever it is you're doing, whether that's in business or your health or whatever your daily routine is. Then later you can look into 4-hour work week to see how you can sub things out and hire VAs and whatever. But if you don't perfect it first and then you pass it on to somebody, they're going to be as good or as bad as your processes are. So make sure you dial in your processes first.
Right.
So on privacy, I'm super private, which is kind of a juxtaposition because I'm in online marketing. I've taken on a bit of an influencer role within the space of my expertise. And so I like getting on and sharing stories. I like getting on and being vulnerable. I like talking about what's going on, but at the same time, I don't like to expose anything beyond a certain point. So as you said, I refer to my wife as Hottie. So I talk about Hottie all the time. I talk about my kids all the time, but with my kids, I never say their names. I never share identifiable pictures of them. And so every once in a while, I'll share a picture of them because I love my kids and I love sharing them with the world. But it's always, an angle that just coincidentally you can't identify them. And a lot of people are kind of surprised by that because, like you said, we're just kind of conditioned and it's just normal. And so I get it. What I do, I don't expect other people to do. But my reasoning behind it is, I see these other things that happened. I've had one wild story, well, actually 2 wild stories. I had a friend who worked for a company they would get products manufactured over in Asia. And so he would fly out there every couple months. He goes over to China and he's in whatever store and he sees a picture of his friend it as the stock photo in a picture frame. And so he FaceTimes or Skypes or whatever, shares his friend, and his friend identifies it from one of his Facebook pictures.
Wow.
There's no jurisdiction that's, how are you going to enforce anything like that? Because if your pictures are public, they're public. And so you have no idea where it goes. Now, another interesting story is a photographer that I was friends with in high school. She, being a photographer, she shares, her art and her skill set and the pictures of her family. So she had somebody reach out to her and somebody had set up a charity, a nonprofit in Brazil, and had taken the entire timeline of my friend's family, adding kids, getting married, and then said, and posed as this person and said her husband got cancer and died, and now she's a widower, widow. What is it? Widower?
Widower. Yeah, you and I would be widowers, right?
Yeah. So she's a widow, and was just setting up this all her time, like just took her whole identity and ran with it to siphon off money from anybody that would believe her. But she had the whole timeline because all the pictures were online, and so she could just sequence that timeline. So there's a lot of odd things like that I've been exposed to where I just kind of said, well, you never know what happens. The internet's forever. So once it's on there, it's on there. And so I've kind of taken a step back and just been really aware of what I post online.
Right. That's very similar to Gary Vaynerchuk. I mean, you never see pictures of his kids, right, or his wife or anything on there. He talks about, them like never letting them win a game, right? Because he's like, like one school of thought with parenting is like you just like let them win and build confidence in them. He's like, no, not until they can beat me, they're gonna beat me. But there's never a picture of them online, right? And so it's really an interesting line. My wife and I have talked about that now that I'm doing something very similar, being an influencer in the space and doing that, and it's like, because I talk about family, right? And I talk about my parents, and I talk about them having cancer and those things and my issues that I go through, but it's really an interesting piece of the puzzle. Now it's funny, we're live, right? And I can't edit this, and I had another question for you and I kind of lost it. So
no, you're good. I would say that with all the things we're talking about, you have to be willing to experiment and do the A/B kind of testing, because I had to go through a process where, what do I talk about? What do I not talk about? I want to share these stories. I want to talk about my wife. I want to talk about my kids, but how do I do it without, I don't want to put a picture of my kids online and then blur their face, because that's even more weird. So you have to figure out like what your voice is, what you're comfortable talking about. And if there's circumstances where you need exceptions, where, like I do, like the other day I updated my profile picture because we got new family photos. And so there was a great photo of me and my kids, and it just happened to be angles where you can't see their faces. So yay.
Right. Yeah, I updated my profile picture yesterday, but that's because I went for a hike with no shirt on in the mountains and snow.
I remember that.
Yeah. But yeah, I've actually done the same thing where I've been on a hike or something with my kids, and I'll ask my daughter to turn, or I'll have it in portrait mode where you can't really make out my son's face in the background, stuff like that. Another thing to, what I remembered actually, I don't know if you saw me, like, oh yeah, I remember, another person that I'd actually interviewed for one of my podcasts, when I reached out to ask about being a guest through LinkedIn, she had her team like go to my profile and check me out because she actually had somebody show up at her house and stalk her. Right. And so, I mean, you and I being guys, we don't really think about that, but female influencers, that's another whole aspect of this privacy piece. Like, I saw somebody, a female influencer in the health space, and she had like literally like her home address on her webpage. And I was like, I even still just put Park City, Utah. I don't put my address. I don't put my neighborhood I live in, those type of things. And so I live outside of Park City proper city limits. But that's another piece of the privacy piece I think people, especially women, need to be careful of.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I agree. I as men, the thought process doesn't go as far as women need to for safety. But I do the same thing where I don't put out my addresses, and I actually take it a step further where I have a dozen websites bookmarked that every 6 months I go in and look up my name and pull the public data, because and then submit a removal request, because it's public data. It's gonna float to the top every couple months. And so I go in there and I have a list of a handful of websites, and then, all my kids, my wife, our birthdays, everything ready to rock. And I go through there and look for those things and then just scrub them out.
Yeah, it's super important because, like you said, it's the internet, things live forever. And there's even, things that or you may even delete from a social media platform that's still on their servers, right? It's still there. And a lot of people don't know that. Messaging through the Messenger app, that stuff lives forever. Any images, live forever on some server somewhere. You would think at some point we're going to run out of storage space, but that keeps growing exponentially.
It just doubles every year. Yeah. I think once you realize the literalness, that's a word, right? Literalness of the phrase "internet is forever," it really makes you stop and think about, how you're using technology and apps. Like, I'm very sensitive to the apps that I use, if they have access to photos or this or that. So the internet, including your phone, is truly forever. And so what's the old saying that, decades ago, it was like, don't say anything that you wouldn't want printed on the front of the New York Times. It's kind of like the same thing. Don't post or share anything that you don't want to live on forever on the internet.
Right. I know it's I even heard Tom Bilyeu say, he goes, I'm one wrong word away from all of this ending.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's got 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and a big business and Quest bars and
I've thought about that too.
The whole thing, right? And it's like, especially like, when we start talking about, like I did a show where we were talking about, I got asked I was very careful about how I posed the question, but I had a executive chef who is a female, and I was doing this thing about ask the restaurant general manager coach a question. And basically the question came from a female who was an assistant general manager in a company that had 46 general managers, and only 3 of them were women. She goes like, how do I, navigate to be a general manager? Right. So I asked Katie Horn, executive chef on the guest, like how she would do it. So she had me an answer there. And then I also talked about what I thought about women general managers and leadership, and how women have more compassion and sympathy than men do. And in a lot of ways, maybe not you, you're a super nice guy. I think one of the nicest people I've ever met, but the typical guy leader is going to be a little hardcore, like militant in a way,
old school. Yeah.
Yeah. Old school. Like, I'm going to break them down. Like my son and I are watching this like boot camp in Paris Island for the Marines. And he was like, yeah, we're going to break them down and then build them back up. I'm like, I got restaurant managers that were worse than drill sergeants in a lot of ways, trying to break people down, right? Versus hiring the best people. And so even, when we're out in this, influencer space talking, doing these live shows, and, it's not curated. I mean, we literally, like, I asked you, what do you want to talk about? You said maybe work-life balance, right? And that was it. You didn't come onto the show until after the intro started. So we're not like,
yeah.
So it's like, because you were like in your email trying to find the link on how to get in the show. Right. And so it could be easy to have a slip up here or there when you're talking about sensitive subjects,
Well, that's a good kind of topic to touch on, where we talked about knowing your boundaries. And so a lot of times I'll go on and do shows like this, and I'll do podcasts, and especially now where politics is so heated, I'll just tell, I'm totally an open book with the exception of politics and religion, because from my perspective, there's no potential positive outcome to talk about it. Either the audience or the person posing the question agrees with you, so then there's nothing to prove, or they disagree with you and there's nothing to prove. So anytime I go, don't be hesitant to establish the boundaries and set the precedence of what you're willing to talk about, for yourself, or if you start becoming an influencer or whatever. Like, you are who you are, and don't be hesitant to own what you are and are not comfortable in any capacity talking about, doing whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's really an interesting thing. Yesterday, and I'm going to post this on Facebook. We have an old cat. She's like 19 years old, and her hair gets all matted. So my wife like shaves her hair off, right? She's got a sweater on her. So she's sitting. So I got this cat that's 20 years old roaming around the house, and my daughter has these 2 lovebirds. And so I'm sitting there yesterday morning, I'm watching a sermon. I'm not talking about religion, but I'm watching a sermon. I turn around, the cat's sitting in the sun, and the 2 lovebirds are on her back, right? Sitting there on her back, and the cat's just like this, and then the birds are on her back. And I was like, I actually was starting to think, is like, well, look, we can all get along. And I actually, I was like, what would I post about this? And I actually was like, even though we're opposing like politics, right? Democrat, Republican, right? We still can all, at the end of the day, we all can enjoy a little sunshine together or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, I don't know if I want to post a political type thing, right? So I didn't even post it. I didn't even, because I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to say about this, but it's a really,
it always turns political. Yeah. That's why I just stay out of it, because even though you can pose it without politics in necessarily as the underlying objective, someone's going to take it there. And so I just avoid it entirely, because you have people that are just so, and like, if politics are a thing, that's fine. But that's the point, is you can't win or prove a point or just innocently share a positive comment, because people become so heated about those types of things that they're going to take it there, even if that wasn't even the intention.
Well, it's an interesting thing. I was like, I think you very rarely find somebody like, hey, I'm going to go watch this show because I want to hear the other side of the story. Right. Like, for instance, like if you just take 2 YouTube influencers, right, that are on both sides of the aisle, so to speak. You got the Young Turks that are on the left, right? So I don't see a card carrying NRA, rifle owning, like concealed carry person going and watching the Young Turks to, learn about what the Biden's views are, right? Or vice versa, somebody who may be on the left are not going and watching Louder with Crowder to see, to watch his show to learn more about the right. And so we end up just a lot of times, not me and probably not you, but because I think there's so much we're missing from this, respect, right, for conversation and debate that our forefathers had, right? We're so divided right now. It's like people aren't not getting the other side of the story.
Well, technology, to kind of bring this full circle, it's because technology has just made it so easy to fall into echo chambers where and especially when social media platforms, like they're built to hold your attention. Mm-hmm. And so to hold your attention, they share more of the things that you engage with and like. And so that's where the echo chambers are created. So you don't even know that unless you're aware of, how these algorithms work. And so you just start to think that the majority of the people in the world are just like you. And so then you become more polarized regardless. And this doesn't even have to do with politics or religion. It can be any subject. It could be the flat earth movement. It could be whatever. Like once you start to get exposed to those things or show engagement on social media, you're just going to see more and more and more of them. And so you got to you have to make a conscious effort to take a step back and expose yourself to, like, you have to go out of your way to expose yourself to the other side, because these tools are curating content to continue to feed your attention that you've shown you have, that you're leaning towards.
Right. Like if I didn't understand how the algorithms worked, I would believe that the only ads that ever run on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn are about how to develop a course, right? Or be an entrepreneur, or, those type of things. So that's because if I click on one or two of those just to see what the video is. And occasionally I'll now still get a couple that might be about exercise or workouts or things like that, because I've done a lot of research in that. Like maybe he's still interested in this, Tap Brothers, primal, physique workout type thing. And I'll get that occasionally, but most everything I get is on, being an entrepreneur, content creation, Facebook ads or LinkedIn or those type of things. And so it's really, really a cool thing. So let's back up. Let's give a recap for people who may be coming on the show right now. We're talking about the next level work-life balance of Damon Burton. And the first step, I believe, was really kind of setting your boundaries and hard lines on that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So pick what boundaries you want to set, or prioritize what you don't have to figure out what you're going to exclude. Maybe first look at what you want to include, and then find that slot in the day where that thing is. So the example I gave was I like to walk my kids to school. Excuse me, as long as it's like a decent weather day, walk them home. So 8:30 and 3:30, those are off the calendar. So I block it out, and then figure out like where you want to spend your time and prioritize that. And then everything else comes after that. So 5 o'clock, office phone shut off. I don't give out my cell phone to clients. I don't have Messenger on my phone because I don't want those interruptions. So when it's work time, I'm all in on work time. And when it's family time, I'm hopefully all in on family time, but with those lesser distractions by not having email, Messenger, whatever it is that you're obsessed with, figure out where you want to prioritize. It's not about focusing on excluding things. It's about prioritizing what you want to include. And then a result of that is the exclusion.
Right. Well, there's another piece of the puzzle, and I actually learned this from you, is that, you use Calendly a lot for your, like, for instance, I don't normally have guests on Monday. So when I asked you about being on the show, you sent me a link. So I had to pick a day for you to be on my show, right? Basically, it would fit into your calendar. Yeah. And it was this Monday, like 3 weeks out. So I picked this day 3 weeks out. So that means instead of my normal format of having 3 guests in a week and 2 solo shows, that I have 4 guests this week, which is a super lineup. You even made a comment, you included, I'm super excited about this week's shows, and I only have like 1 solo show to talk about, and that's Wednesday, which is kind of like this one I talk about, these self-tests, these A/B tests or biohack tests that I do on myself. And so there's so you've got, and I've been on your podcast, learning from others podcasts. So there was a link for me to get on that show, right? So how do you use Calendly really to, you block out things, but you also have multiple links to go out for different types
Different
of either
rules. Yeah.
rules that you have built in. So how do you use that?
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to documenting your processes basically. So you figure out, what these rules are and dates and availability. So I use, so there's Calendly, the one I use is Acuity, and there's like a million different ones if you search like online scheduler. And what you do is you integrate them with your calendar. And so I use Apple products, this works for Google products too, but I have a Mac computer, I have an iPhone. And so they all use the same calendar. So then when you connect one of these calendar tools, you set these rules that say, my availability is only based on what is open on my calendar. And because you use your calendar, it's real time. So anytime I have a thing with my kids, it goes on there, which blocks off the availability on my work calendar. And so like you said, you can set up different calendars. So I have one where it's, SEO and business calls, and then there's availability the same day up to 30 minutes. Then there's like me on other people's shows, there's people on my shows. And so they all have different rules based on what I have to prioritize. Obviously, taking care of clients and paying the bills is a little bit more of a priority than jumping on podcasts. And so I set different rules where, like you said, there's a little bit of a gap or a delay based on maybe I only take one podcast a week, or maybe I do 2 a week of my podcast, but I only do 1 a week of somebody else's podcast. So it sets these dynamic rules that basically keeps my life streamlined and prevents the ability of overbooking. And like you said, being available 24/7. If I didn't set those rules and different dynamic rules for different priorities, you'd have stuff coming in and beeping 24/7. So define what those priorities are, and then connect one of these apps to that calendar. And then you can, I live and die by my calendar in real time. And I don't even, when I wake up, for the most part, I have no idea what tomorrow is, because I just send people my link. And then I know, because I took the time to set the rules, that I'm good.
Right. Well, the same thing's for me. And I've taken a page out of that book. And so you think when I'm booking 3 guests a week, I'm going back and forth. Right. And most people are
So
used
much
to
time.
Yeah, people. Yeah, and people are so used to being a podcast, and they're like going, "Well, we can record it anytime, and this is what works best for me." I'm like, "This is a live show. Here's the link, right? Choose it." And I'm booked 6. There's no available, for 3 days a week. There's no available even up until like the second week of January now. And all I've done is to send people this Bitly link to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I do a coaching discovery calls, and I send a different link for that. So that's 2:00 in the afternoon. It's kind of my best time of the day. I'm thinking the best, and I can set people calls up with people during that time frame. And now what I still have email on my phone. I'm still diehard when it comes to that. Right. And I use mostly Gmail. And what I did is I put my email into my iPhone email app. So Calendly syncs with all that stuff. So it's all on my phone. Yeah. It's on my Gmail, modernlongevitarian at gmail.com, and it's all synced the same way. But I love the way that you do it, to not have an email on your phone. And so I can only hope that when I grow up, I'm more like Damon Burton.
Well, you got to feel comfortable with it. You got to figure it out. And depending on the listener, they probably already have relationships and expectations that they're going to have to segue and adjust. So it's not like you can go cold turkey for a lot of people. But the key is, like we said at the beginning of the show, is you just have to set those expectations. And so I beat a dead horse. When I'm talking to a client, I tell them like, hey, during negotiations, like, here's availability. We're super going to take care of you Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. But after that, like, we'll get back to you on Monday. And so It's not weird unless you make it weird. So I have no problems. A lot of times when I talk about this, people will say, well, have you ever lost business? I honestly would say no. And, sure, there's a chance that I might have, but if there's somebody that needs me 24/7, they're not the client for me anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's, and that's really about picking the right client for you. Right. Simon Sinek talks about that, so when he's on the phone with somebody doing a discovery call, it's like, convince me why I need to have come you speak. And he's like, well, you're not the right client for me. Right. If I got to convince you, you're either bought into what we're doing or you're not.
Yeah.
So, gosh, we could, you and I, we could talk for hours, and we're actually going to talk a little bit after the show, but, is there anything else you want to add to, these, part about, what I call next level, work-life balance?
Maybe where I'll end is be okay. One thing I often say is be okay with the unknown. And so what I mean by that is don't feel obligated to figure out your schedule based on somebody else's schedule, your lifestyle based on somebody else's lifestyle, your anything based on anybody else's anything. So I think one thing that's really led to me finding a place where I feel productive and I've had a certain level of success in my career is because I was willing to have delayed gratification, and I was okay with figuring out what my I was in my teens, early 20s. I was fairly confident I would do my own thing eventually, but I had no idea what that thing was, but I was okay with that. And so I think what happens is a lot of, especially now with social media amplifying everything and instant gratification, I think we're conditioned, especially younger generations, to think that you need to have all the answers now because you see the influencers, you see the whatever, but you don't see the 10 years behind that it took for them to get there. So whatever your thing is, whether it's health, business, whatever, like, don't listen to what anybody else says, including myself. Don't listen to me. Like, figure out what works for you and be okay with the process, like going through the journey. And it's better to take time longer to figure out things the right way than to prematurely decide or take action that's incorrect.
Absolutely. If I could tag onto that, for me, when I was a kid, I started racing go-karts and loved racing. Grew up in South Carolina, huge Dale. My dad was a huge Dale Earnhardt fan. My dad used to go to the old school NASCAR on Thursday nights at the old Columbia Speedway and watch, like Richard Petty and the Yarborough brothers and Allison brothers. And when he was in high school in the 60s, and totally loved it. And when I got into racing, I sucked, man. I totally sucked. It took me 8 years to win a race. 8 years to win my first race. I ended up winning some really cool championships and Sportsman of the Year awards and things like that. It was fully sponsored by a couple really super nice families. The Sox family and also the Camp family sponsored me at the end of my career. And you got to think about all the success that I had came after I'd put in all the years of running in the last. I would go to a state race. There'd be 3 people in the class. I'd finish third. I get a trophy. My dad was like, "Don't tell anybody how many people are in the race, right?" What'd you do? Finish third, right? Don't tell there was only 3 people, right? It's like, but then it was like I'm going to races. When I get into my career, there's 150 people that sign up, in Daytona for limited modified heavy, and I qualified third and finished second. Ended up winning the national championship that year. And there's 75 people entering that class every time, and you're like, I'm like the best guy in the land, where like just 3 years ago, I'd like never won a championship before, even a state.
Yeah, and I bet the reason why you were able to go so long, go 8 years, a lot of other people in that same circumstance would have become frustrated and given up. But I'm willing to bet that you were like focusing on yourself and going, okay, what can I do better? What can I do to, turn better, drive faster, whatever. I'm not a racer. I don't know what goes into racing, but figuring out the ins and outs of the process to improve your process until you started to see results, and then you see a small result, and then that inspires you to go to the next result.
Right. All those things, right? Because the thing about racing too is that you have to be willing to, like, imagine like if a process that you have, and you probably do the same thing, a process that you have for, I don't know, you pick whatever it is, just doesn't work. And it's just, you have to be willing to throw that whole setup completely out and start over again the next week, because there's this whole cycle running inside of racing where you may be super fast and you become kind of like Rocky when he gets beat by Clubber Lang. He's not hungry anymore. He lost the eye of the tiger, right? You lose the eye of the tiger and you start slipping down. Other people are getting faster. And the next thing you know, you're the slowest guy, right?
Yeah.
And so it just cycles around like that. But you're right. It was like I had to learn how to drive. I had to learn the mental side of racing. I had to learn, my dad, and when I say, I'm 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, right? So my dad's a big part of that. He's asking questions to other people whose kids are a little bit older than mine. And it's just a progression to get through that. But it was a process. And when you get that dialed in, you start, all those things, it's like, people start trying to mess with your head. Scott's not the best driver. He's just got the fastest go-kart. And I was like, well, he still won. It doesn't matter if he's the best driver or not. He still won. right? Or there may be other people who are faster than you, have more horsepower, better tires, better sponsorships, more money, those type of things. And so you're dealing with all that type of stuff. And gosh, you nowhere near win, all the races you enter in. But the coolest thing about this now is watching people that I race against. There's a guy named Chuck Gafara, and we're friends on Facebook. And actually, he came to race out at the Miller track on a go-kart, and I went to see him, right? And his son's probably 13 years old, something like that. He's like, Facebook Live, he was racing in Italy last night. I'm watching this 2:00 in the morning. I'm watching his son practice in Italy, right? Because he's traveling around. It's fully sponsored. So it's like seeing that carry on to another generation for one of a guy I used to race against is a really cool thing that I see now. But you're right. You had to develop the process, right? And you learn those things. And there's different processes for different track surfaces. And those are one of the things that I really took to the restaurant business. And then also, look at how I look at systems, right? Because I see this whole big thing, because your go-kart has to go on a track that the conditions change based off the weather and how many people are driving on it. And, if they wet the track, grate the track, if it rains, if it doesn't rain, if the tide comes in, if you're close to the ocean, those type of stuff. So it's all these variables that come into play, with that. So I wasn't planning on talking about all that, but there we go. Right.
We've covered a broad stretch of things on this one.
We did, for sure. Yeah. So people are going, they were going to talk about this, but they went like way over there, for sure. But no, I think we definitely covered what we wanted to cover in the show. So where, other than DamonBurton.com, where can people find you online?
Most active on LinkedIn and Facebook. And if you go to DamonBurton.com, there's links to my profiles. And then if we didn't talk about SEO intentionally, but if SEO is your thing, then there's some links on there about how you can catch my book too.
Yeah. The book's amazing, and I and you post occasionally on the channels, like what kind of results you're delivering for your clients, right? Blocking their name out, privacy, obviously, right? But SEO is not dead, for sure.
No, it's I mean, this is another little abstract version of what we said before is, who cares what other people are doing? Don't get caught up in what other people are doing, because, I've stayed in my lane of SEO my entire career. And, if you don't know what SEO is, it stands for search engine optimization. So the goal is to have your website show up at the top of search engines, but without paying for ads. And so when that concept came out 15, 16, 20 years, however long ago, it was like the new sexy thing. But then ClickFunnels came along and Facebook ads came along and whatever came along. And so anytime there's a new shiny object, SEO is kind of like the OG of marketing, and it's still kind of hanging out in the back doing its thing, but it's just not the new sexy guy anymore. But what's interesting is, as people are burning money on paid ads, and I'm not saying paid ads are good or bad, or, I'm not the guy that says SEO is the only way, but it seems like SEO, it's never left for me or anybody that's stayed in the world of it, and business continues to grow each year. But from a public perspective, it seems like it's kind of becoming the sexy thing again, because people are, especially if you're into Facebook ads, your ad account gets shut off every other day. And so all these instabilities and all these levers you got to pull on all these other paid ads applications, it seems like people are looking for more stability. And so I've seen an interesting revival in SEO interest lately.
Yeah, I've seen, because I didn't start modernlongevitarian.com, which you can get to by going to, by the way, strongforlonger.com was your idea, because because when I was on your podcast, I was like, where do people find you? I'm like, if you can figure out how to spell modernlongevitarian.com, go ahead. He's like, so, and you and I are fellow domain name collectors, right? So did I tell you about ombrehacks.com? Yeah.
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. That was one I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I'll buy that. Right.
I'll figure it out later.
I own Modern Longevitarian.
After I got to a couple hundred, I had to stop that habit.
I'm probably at 25 right now, where we have multiple accounts though, but so maybe more than that. But it's really an interesting thing where, and that actually came from an idea with my son. I was like, maybe we should do like manhacks.com. And then that was already taken, but then, so Ombre Hacks sounded pretty cool. So I bought that. But my point is that I didn't start, even though I own modernlongevitarian.com for, January will be 9 years now. I didn't put a website up until, I'd owned it for 8.5 years before I actually put a website there. And longevitarian.com wasn't available, but I own that now, and that forwards to Modern Longevitarian. But my point being,
you got Longevitarian, just the straight Longevitarian.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. So I own that one, and I got it forwarded to Modern Longevitarian. The reason it became Modern Longevitarian is because longevitarian.com was taken when I thought of it. And it's a word that dates back to the 1850s, right? So it's nothing that I created, where a lot of people may create their a new way of spelling avocado or something like that, right? It came to me. I'm not a vegetarian. I'm a longevitarian. I went to GoDaddy. It was taken. I went to the website, and it forwarded you to supercentenarian.com, which is about people in the blue zones, really, and which are the 5 areas of the world that have the highest per capita people over 100 years old. And I was like, well, I live in a modern world, so I'm more of a modern longevitarian. So I bought that, and had been, playing around with it, not even as a side hustle, but just like, this is who I am kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I started this whole conversation about that is that I've noticed that just recently in the last 4 to 6 weeks that, on the traffic side of things, that I'm seeing people finding the website through search engines and I haven't done hardly any search engine optimization in that, or even with my post or that type of stuff, but I'm being found that way. And that may be through a Pinterest, pin that had gone viral. That's on the top of like can't sleep search or something like that. But I'm being found on, and even some search engines that are not Google, that are like another whole, and not even DuckDuckGo. It's just these other like international ones that are being found on. So it's really kind of a wild thing,
Yeah, it's cool to see when you start getting traction and just where the visits are coming from.
Yeah, it is. So what's the craziest domain name that you own, if you want to give that out?
Did I own? I got so many. I got one. I'm trying to think of ones that I've got. I purchased a lot of them when I was in my early 20s and drunk. So some are probably not so PG. One that I remember that I'll tell you some of the odd ones that I still have, and I still have them just because I still have them. Like, I just don't want to. I've had them for 15 years, and I feel like, on the marketing side, there's value in the age of a domain. So like you said, you can own it and just not be doing anything with it. So I have a lot that I've just been sitting on, like some really odd ones. Like one I read an article about a guy that was selling commercial real estate, but he would sell it by the inch. And so he had it in these, like, I can't remember the whole story, but it made sense. It made a lot more sense than I'm going to communicate it. So he would sell these little properties by the inch, and he would sell them for ad space or something like that. And so he coined the term inchvestor. And I happened to catch the article when it was only a day or two old. And so that's a trait I've been able to pick up, is, kind of catching on to things when they're going to, that reminds me, I do got another good one after this. And so I bought inchvestor.com. I've never done anything with it. I've had it for like 15 years. I don't know why I still have it, but that's one. But that reminds me of, did you see this was probably like 2 years ago. There was the Tom Cruise impersonator that did Run Tom Run, and he was going to do, and it was a parody about Tom Cruise, how he's always action and Mission Impossible kind of stuff. But he was running for president. So it starts as this joke where he's like running in a desert, and he's like, I'm running for president. And then, so it's like this big long thing. And then I caught that video when it had a couple 100,000 views, and I could tell it was going to go viral, or was, going viral, because it was only like a day old and had a couple 100,000. So I went to learn more, like who's doing this video, because it was well produced. And so I went to runtomrun.com, because that's what they kept talking about. And wasn't purchased. And so I bought it and then redirected it to my company site with a page that said like, hey, if you're here for this, we didn't have anything to do with this video, but can you notice how important marketing is? And then use it to segue them into over what we were doing. And so I bought Run Tom Run. I can't remember what their live domain was, but it was something totally off. And so I ended up getting runtomrun.com, and I still have it. And it ended up driving a couple thousand visits when the whole thing was at its peak. So I don't know. There you go. We are all over the place on this one.
Yeah, I have one. I wanted to start a golf business, and I was like toofarfrompar.com, right?
Yeah.
I had that one. I still own straightcabbage.com, and you laugh about straight cabbage all the time. Yeah. So straightcabbage.com. And I had a blog at Straight Cabbage probably 8-9 years ago. It was like one of my first ones. There's been some other crazy ones that I've kind of let go over time. One I had, there was a Hootie and the Blowfish song. It talked about, had a line in it that it's something like, I remember when the first time an astronaut, had, he communicated to somebody on Earth with a ham radio. So it was like an astronaut on the radio. So I had radioastronaut.com, which was like, I don't know. I didn't do anything with it.
I got another weird one for you. I watched like a evening news thing forever ago, probably also 15 years ago. And it was talking about how there's a huge market for classified ads for prisoners, and how prisoners will be like, if you're reading this, I need this book or this thing or whatever. And it was like this huge market. And so I bought prisonclassifieds.com.
Yeah, that was, I can't top that one. We'll just end it there, right?
Yeah. Thanks. Let's leave it there. There's nothing on there. It's just a domain.
Yeah. Just a domain, right? I have, like I said, I have 25 of those that are domains that I just think are cool. And then I said, I'm never going to do anything with this. And so I just let it drop off or something like that. But some of them have instant value, like strongforlonger.com immediately had an instant value over $1,000. And I've noticed website traffic from your recommendation ticking up since that, because it's easier to get to the website, than it is to try to type in modern longevitarian. And so it's been really, really interesting piece of the puzzle. And, I initially called this show, It's My Friday, and it still has the logo on there. It's My Friday. So I bought It's My Friday.life, right? Cause I was thinking maybe I sell a couple of t-shirts or something like that on there. So I have those type of things, but we're just over an hour now, and I can't thank you enough for coming on, Damon. It's been super cool.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me ramble.
No, I think we definitely have gone the gamut from, life hacks to like being a collector of domain names, which most people probably didn't know it even existed. And it's like a closet thing, right? It's like,
in your space, maybe. So, yeah.
Right. Exactly. But no, it's been super fun. I've enjoyed talking to you. I'm going to wrap it up right here and then play the outro, and then we'll sign off. Again, I want to say thanks for everybody watching on LinkedIn. Thanks for everybody on the Spirituality Gone Wild Network, Debbie G, and the whole crew over there. Really got some great things coming up. It's Cyber Monday. I'm going to be sending out a message later today about joining the Untamed Club, and which is part of the Spirituality Gone Wild Network. You have access to all the other 17 other co-creators and the courses and all those things that are in there. And so it's super, super. The value of this for $22 a month, you're going to get, I think, a free month for the Cyber Monday. You got to think you have 18 different people: Stream of David, American Gumption Morning Show, Steve Weber, Debbie G with her cup of gratitude. I mean, all kind of stuff. And also me, Scott, the modern longevitarian. So I'm going to sign out right here and play this outro. And if it's your Friday, have a great weekend. Cheers.